Thank you, and welcome to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, and presented by ICF International. Today's webinar is entitled, If Data Standards Followed Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, Are We Ready for Safety? I am Joyce Rose, your host and moderator for today's webinar. As we look forward to the comprehensive child welfare information system we hear about, its emphasis on data quality and how quality data is vital for all program activities. In today's webinar, we will hear the experience of one state in undertaking an enterprise-wide emphasis on data quality, starting with maybe the simplest of data elements, our client's name. Today, Maryland staff will share stories of the difficulty in isolating data quality issues, then lay out the framework they will follow in resolving these issues as part of their enterprise data modernization effort. Their lessons learned when data is not complete, timely, accurate, or consistent offer a sobering look on how it can affect the safety and well-being of children and families. Next, please. Attendees are encouraged to participate in our webinar with questions and comments. All of the participant lines are muted now, but we will open them for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. However, please be aware that you can submit questions at any time using the GoToWebinar chat feature, and those too will be addressed during the later Q&A session. Now, should we run out of time, we will respond to your questions via email, and/or should you have additional questions, you may submit those to me at the email address listed on the slide, joyce@kassets.com. Also, if you have any topics that you would like to recommend as potential webinars, please do not hesitate to contact me. Next, please. The Division of State Systems within the Children's Bureau continues to provide a series of monthly webinars supporting information sharing and discussion. Understanding who is attending the webinars helps to identify content that is applicable for everyone participating in an agency's CWIS efforts. Please self-select one of the 5 categories listed, and my colleague Elizabeth will conduct the poll. Elizabeth?
Yes, so I've launched the poll. If you all could go ahead and just click on the category that is most appropriate. If you are participating in a room with a group of people, just select the category that best represents the largest number of people in the room. And I'll give you just a minute or two to go ahead and do that.
A poll appears on screen to assess the backgrounds of those attending the webinar.
Okay, with 90% of our group, I feel like CNN, with 90% of precincts being reported, it looks like we have 18% child welfare information systems program managers, 68%, so by far our largest group, state child welfare information systems program, policy, or technical staff, and our remaining 13% is ACF Children's Bureau personnel or contractors or technical staff.
0% are tribal child welfare info system project managers. 0% are tribal child welfare info system program, policy, or technical staff.
That is a fantastic representation, and I'm so pleased to see the largest body being the program, policy, and technical folks. So let's move ahead now and meet our presenters for today. David Ayer joined the Social Services Administration of Maryland in 2007 and currently focuses on research, evaluation, information systems development, provider contracts and monitoring, and assists with the agency's budget, audits, and legislation. His focus throughout these years has been on developing and monitoring indicators of child and family well-being and designing, implementing, and fixing information systems to help providers and frontline staff do their work. Lori has served in many capacities, including early support and implementation of the Client Information System, which was the agency's legacy system, and the development and implementation of Maryland's SACWIS, called CHESI. In her role as a data analyst and application specialist for both CHESI and CIS, Lori uses her extensive analytic experience to improve system functioning and reporting, resolve critical interface issues between applications, and identify and resolve data, and reporting problems as they emerge. John has served the state of Maryland as the Deputy Chief Technology Officer for IT Modernization since 2015. In previous roles, he has worked with cloud and data initiatives that make him well-suited for his current role as Deputy CTO. John also has a bachelor's degree from Cal State University, Dominguez Hills, and recently completed coursework for a Master's of Science degree at the University of Maryland. So I want to welcome our presenters, and I would like to turn it over to David Eyre, please.
Bullet points on the slide are as follows. Bullet point 1. Review of the foundational challenges on which all data standards depend, client identification challenges, and agency interface challenges. Bullet point 2. Review of Maryland's modernization efforts that will aim to meet these foundational challenges. Common data repository with advanced identity deconfliction. And RESTful APIs to connect to other agencies and systems.
Great, thank you. If you go to the next slide. Hello everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to the West Coasters and beyond. We hope you'll find this presentation helpful as you consider how you'll make updates with your systems. Today we're going to use a problem solution story format, stories about the challenges we've had experiencing in Maryland for many years, and then explain how our IT modernization efforts underway are expected to help us reach the promised land of data certitude. So my guess is that you don't have exactly the same kind of systems and setup as we do in Maryland, but I suspect that you probably have some current challenges like we do in managing client data and achieving quality, and we appreciate your attention and feedback today. Next slide, please.
The title of the slide is Overarching Framework for Considering Data Standards. The graphic consists of a circle, colored tan and labeled Data Quality. Arrows point outward from the circle toward each of 6 rectangles arranged around the circle. They are labeled and contain the following text, clockwise from the top. Light blue, labeled Validity, are all data values within the value domains specified by the business. Dark blue, labeled Accuracy, does data reflect the real-world objects or verifiable space. Yellow, labeled Consistency, is data consistent between systems? Do duplicate records exist? Light blue, labeled Integrity, are the relations between entities and attributes consistent, within tables and between? Dark blue, labeled Timeliness, is the data available at the time needed? Yellow, labeled Completeness, is all necessary data processed?
There are several touch points around data quality as illustrated in this wheel of data quality dimensions. And there are many good resources online like this graphic that you can find. In our agencies, we need to address these basic dimensions of data quality, ranging from such basics as data completeness. Do we have all the data elements we need for our organization? What is the validity and accuracy of data elements? Are we using the right ones for our business practice, and are they representative of the realities that our organizations address day in and day out? Among the data elements that we use is their relational integrity. And can we achieve data consistency between agency systems? Finally, are the data that we need or that another agency needs available timely when it's needed? Relatedly, in order to have general confidence in the data elements used in our systems, I'd like to touch on a few absolute essentials for rock-solid data management, especially important in an integrated, interoperable environment that we aspire to build for our frontline staff. And it is embodied in one word, and that is testing. Testing, testing. Great data is made of hard and constant testing, and an organization's commitment to fixing what it finds, the problems that it finds. We need to make sure that we have ongoing regression testing, integrated system testing to uncover and address problems and how systems work together, and thorough testing using real-world data, following, I'll call them bruising test scripts that mimic all the crazy ways that users might knowingly or unknowingly navigate the system as they use it, so that we can really find the blind spots and improve our system's ability to gather good data. Next slide, please. So, believe it or not, I have tried, along with others, and I must admit, not with a lot of success in Maryland since way back in the very early internet days, to try to put together, spur interest, and to craft an interagency information system. We did not reach the vision back then, but as you can see, I think we built a solid vision statement.
The slide reads, Maryland's vision, simple and solid. Bullet point 1, to optimize outcomes for children, youth, and families by using the right technology to get the right information into the right hands at the right time and in the right way, particularly at the caseworker level. Bullet point 2, perhaps you've had interagency information systems meetings and asked these same questions. What principles become important? Why do we need to embark on a shared vision for sharing data? Why bother? What do we have in common, and what are our most basic data needs? A citation appears in the bottom of the screen. 2001, Creating an Interagency MIS Vision and Plan to Improve Services.
The 2001 report stated that for more than a decade, state and local staff and managers noted difficulties of getting client data out of systems and into the hands of caseworkers who need the data. Problems typically discussed in terms of different data being in different places, data being incomplete or inaccurate, and the lack of access to data that a caseworker needs when it is needed. Thousands of caseworkers throughout the state face problems associated with data and information which are critical to their jobs. So this vision statement developed in 2001 remains salient today. Next slide, please. So now we fast forward 15 years. And we will strive and hope with our federal and state partners to keep moving forward. Sequis offers many opportunities along with substantial federal support to build interagency systems using technology tools whose power far surpass what was available a long time ago. Also in Maryland, we have a solid leader, DHR Secretary Sam Malhotra, who has had significant experience and expertise in building information systems. We've formed or are forming agreements with about a dozen agencies that will join us in launching an interconnected system. And with the power of the new tech tools and willingness of interagency partners, we anticipate having success in interagency information systems that we have only dreamed about over the last 30 years in Maryland. And yes, 30 years, there was actually another MIS interagency committee. I was a part of that too before 2001. And so it pains me to think of how long some of us have been very interested in this vision. So you can see some of the kinds of things that we're going to be getting to through modernization on the slide there.
The slide reads, Maryland's vision, achieved through modernization. Bullet point 1, significantly improved IT service quality, which includes improved data quality, interconnected agencies, shared NoSQL data repository, advanced analytics/search functionality. Bullet point 2, resulting in a 360 view of our constituents, allowing for much better outcomes.
So if you go to the next slide, please. So that brings us to the topic of this day, and what the heck, you might ask, does Maslow's hierarchy of human need have to do with this?
A pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy and bulleted info. What is Maslow's hierarchy? A graphic of a triangle is shown. The triangle is divided into 5 sections, horizontally. They are colored and labeled as follows, from top to bottom. Blue, self-actualization. Green, esteem. Yellow, love/belonging. Orange, safety. And red, physiological. Bullets below the triangle diagram read, Abraham Maslow outlined a framework for understanding human motivation. The framework follows a ladder of human needs. Starting with the very basics, air, food, shelter, etc. One level must be reasonably obtained before reaching the next level.
So don't take this analogy too far, and we aren't going to do that today. We're not sure exactly what it might be, exactly what it might sound like to have a self-actualized child welfare IT information system. Would it be some strange sidekick to the Terminator, and if so, what kind of safety is that? So we're taking this only so far as to make the basic point that our essential focus of this day, trying to get some basic processes in place to help us avoid real problems, such as confusion about clients, or worse, losing track of clients or critical information about clients. Data problems can lead us to misdirected payments, or even worse, in rare cases, overlooked safety concerns that can lead to death. And yes, that's right. So the safety and security of our clients, in part, depends on data being right. And so today's presentation is about data standards in order to, for us to improve our systems to help the frontline staff with our key focus on client identification and getting the right information to folks, especially when they're making decisions. As they may be screening in or out for services or other consequential decisions about who should get agency attention and who should not. And if we meet these basic requirements, I do believe we can make better use of data tools that are coming to the fore these days in this century, such as decision support, predictive analytics, the big data tools that I hope we can put to wise use as we bring ourselves along in this 21st century. So, let's turn to the next slide and turn to Marilyn and ask about, well, what's our hierarchy and what are the stories that IT modernization here in Maryland needs to address? So I'm going to turn this over to Laurie and John, who will take us from here, starting with Laurie.
Hello all. So what does Maryland's hierarchy look like? Unlike Maslow, who has already outlined the framework for his model, Maryland is currently in the process of outlining the framework to modernize multi-agency information systems. This modernization effort provides us with an opportunity to improve fundamental data standards. So we start with Maryland's most basic data needs, similar to Maslow's physiological needs, which we have defined as client search, which in the simplest terms is the ability to find the correct client in a database with over 6.2 million client records. Sort of like finding a needle in the desert. Accurate client identification and the need to standardize data collection amongst all agency information systems. What will happen if we can't reasonably attain these very basic data needs? Well, according to Maslow, we're stuck and we'll never reach the next level, which, if you don't remember, is safety. Definitely not a good place to be, especially for a child welfare agency whose primary objective is safety. Let's take a look at our first basic need, which is to find people, client search. Next slide, please. So, having identified client search as a basic data need, we have to ask ourselves, is it easy and is it important? To answer these questions, let me ask you a few brief questions as to whether or not you've ever encountered any of these situations when searching for a client. Clients with more than one unique client ID. And by the way, if your state doesn't have this problem, please contact us because we want to know your secret. Clients who have different demographic data in the computer system that doesn't match the demographic data you were given and was used to search one. My experience suggests that clients are in the system every which way but right. How about mistakenly changing the identity of a client or incorrectly selecting the wrong client in a CPS investigation? What about trying to find clients that you know exist in the system because you just had their case 3 months ago and now all of a sudden you can't find them? What's up with that? Finally, have you ever searched for a client, couldn't find a match, and so a new client ID was created? Unfortunately, you later find out that the client did in fact exist and had significant child welfare history that could have impacted the decisions and recommendations that were made and ultimately could have directly resulted in negative outcomes. Next slide, please. If you answered yes to any of these questions, then the answers are simple. No, client search is not easy, and yes, client search is not merely important, it is absolutely critical. Why? Because bad outcomes can and do happen when complete and thorough searches are not conducted and the computer search method is not reliable, consistent, or understood. We are sharing a few stories of how poor client searches led to bad outcomes in hopes that you also might realize the critical importance of conducting good client searches with the aid of new and improved search method technology. So let's begin with story number 1. Next slide, please.
A screenshot of an article from the Baltimore Sun.
Story number 1. Report on abuse got no response. That's definitely not the type of headline any child welfare agency wants to see. Fly in. So what happened? What happened in 2004, May 2004?
Colored boxes outline key text in the article describing what happened.
1-month-old twin baby girls died. A month later, the teenager and her boyfriend were charged with murder for allegedly breaking the twins' skulls and ribs because they had been released weeks earlier to a minor mother who was in the custody and care of the state on runaway status and who already had her first child removed from her care. So why?
Colored boxes now outline key text in the article describing why this event occurred.
Why? According to the news media report, the call to CPS apparently failed to produce information about the teen mother's involvement with the child welfare agency, including the fact that she was a minor mother on runaway status and was also involved in a prior case of abuse involving her first child. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the why. Why did this happen? The news media article revealed that a social services employee who answered the call from a concerned hospital worker stated that there was no record of active child abuse cases concerning the mother. Additionally, the social services employee did not mention that the mother was in the system twice, once as a missing foster child who had an outstanding warrant for running away, and a second time for when her 2-year-old had been taken away because of abuse. My question would be, did the social service employee actually find a match to the client, but maybe it wasn't the right client ID, either the one with the child welfare history, or did she not mention it because she never even found the match to the client? Next slide, please. You might ask, how did this happen, just as we did? So let's explore the following possibilities. It's quite possible that the employee conducted a search for the teen mother in the computer system using the incorrect spelling of the teen mother's first name. So what exactly does incorrect mean, since the name could have been incorrectly entered when the client was first registered, or the name could have been incorrectly entered in the search criteria when conducting the search. So think about it. How would you spell Sierra? With an S and 2 R's, or with a C and 1 R, or how many other ways can you spell it? Perhaps the employee maybe didn't understand the various types of search methods that are out there. And more specifically, did the employee understand the search method that the department's computer system used? How possible is it that the employee was never trained on how to search for a client based on the search method that the department's computer system used? And finally, perhaps the employee did not know how to interpret what the coded data on the client's history screen meant and incorrectly reported that there was nothing active. So that's our first sad but true story. Next slide, please. Story 2.
A screenshot of an article from a Maryland newspaper.
Spelling error proved fatal. Wanted teen released by mistake, then shot. Well, that certainly isn't the kind of headline you'd like to see in your local newspaper, but the headline actually says it all. The first 2 words of the headline are spelling error, which I find to be very interesting. Who decided that it was a spelling error rather than a poor client search in the computer system? The next words of interest in the headline are released by mistake. Really? Like, how does that happen? We'll talk about that in just a minute. Next slide, please. So what happened? A teenager who had escaped from an out-of-state locked treatment facility was fatally shot in the face outside of a friend's house shortly after being released, mistakenly, by the Department of Juvenile Services as a result of what the news media called a spelling error. Why? Because a juvenile services employee who searched the agency's computer system for outstanding warrants failed to find the warrant for his arrest in connection with the escape. Next slide, please. So how did it happen? Well, according to the news media report, a spelling error led court officials to free a wanted teenager. Although he gave authorities a fake name, his identity was learned from his fingerprints. But unfortunately, the criminal record linked to his fingerprints had the E and the R transposed in his first name. The juvenile services employee searched for the teenager in the computer system using the incorrect spelling. Was it Jeffrey E.R.Y. or was it Jeffrey R.E.Y.? and did not find a match. After not finding a match to the name, the juvenile was subsequently released. If the juvenile services employee had found the match, the teenager's arrest warrant would have been found and he would have been detained instead of being shot to death. He might be alive today. Do you know how your client search is working? If an employee searches for Jeffrey with an ER, does the agency's computer system also return REs as well? So clearly, lives are at stake if we can't address these critical client search issues. So I'm going to hand it over to John so that he can explain how Maryland's IT modernization efforts will improve our ability to find clients. John?
Thank you, Lori. Hi, everyone. So just want to start up, I guess next slide, sorry. So I just want to start off and give a really quick kind of rundown of what we're looking at doing within Maryland that should help alleviate some of these data issues. We're looking to modernize systems, not just within DHR, but across 12 of the departments within the state. Pretty much all of our health and human services agencies have signed on to this to have their platforms modernized and also to share a common data repository. The common data repository is going to be one of the biggest tools that we're going to be able to utilize to solve some of these data issues. It will ingest data from all of the different departments. It will have an identity deconfliction / MDM type of system that's part of the solution. It'll provide matching of different client records. It will, if two client records come in from different sources, it will evaluate them for whether or not they are a match. If it's above a certain threshold, say 99% likely that these are the two, it will join them together. If it's within a certain range, it will kick it out for a social worker or some physical person to actually evaluate to make sure that it is or is not the same record. And if it's below a certain range, it will determine that it's not the same record, and it will automatically separate them. It'll kick one out. We're going to use RESTful APIs so that we can have real-time connections with all the other agencies, so that we won't run into a problem of data duplication if two agencies are putting data in within the same day. For instance, right now we rely a lot on batch processes, which results in a lot of cleanup having to be done on the back end because there's no real-time data exchange, no real-time checking of whether or not the client IDs happen to be the same. And one of the biggest things that we'll have as part of the new system is a modern, updated, flexible search. It will allow for better matches. It will include all those types of things that Lori was talking about with the sound decks. It'll be adaptable and configurable by our data experts here to identify, to return the results that the caseworkers truly are looking for. Next slide. So, addressing the first two stories, both the first two stories could have really been solved with a better client search. But the client search itself really isn't the root of the problem. The root of the problem is the cleanliness of the data. With clean data, everything works better, including the search. Because of that, we need to have this common data repository. We need to have real-time data coming in via our RESTful APIs, and we need to have an identity deconfliction system to provide a golden record of our constituents, and as much as possible, automatically find duplicates upon ingest. We understand that that's not going to happen across the board. We will need to have people actually evaluating a lot of the records, but we can significantly reduce their caseload of having to look at these records with the automated system. And then, of course, the second step is the search functionality. It will also be enhanced. We'll have dictionaries of synonyms, improved sound deck searches, and other configurable types of searches where we can tell it what we're looking for. Next slide. And duplicate
thank you. Duplicate IDs. Yes. Are they a problem? And what's the impact? Yes, duplicate IDs are a huge problem, not just for our agency, but for many other large organizations, such as the healthcare industry, all of whom are struggling to find a solution. The impact is alarming. We have problems with duplicate payments of all kinds, TANF, to vendors, medical assistance capitation fees, and the list goes on. Critical child protective services histories can be missed, not found, as demonstrated earlier. Time and cost of employee resources to research, analyze, and resolve the duplicate IDs. And cumbersome, time-consuming client searches that will likely result in errors and additional duplicate records. So story number 3 is just one of thousands of examples of duplicate IDs previously and currently still being created. If you could advance to slide 20. Oh, yeah, next slide, right. Thank you. The screen that you are looking at is the client search results for a client whose name is George Jones, born on April 7th, 2003. Before we go over the details of this screen, Elizabeth, can you please advance to the next slide, and then we can get back to this in just a few seconds. Thank you. All right, so story number 3 is about George J., age 9, who has already had at least 20 instances of child welfare involvement, 14 of which were CPS investigations. Unfortunately, in order to get a complete picture of George's history with the Child Welfare Agency, a worker must find and review the participation history that is spread among the 7 different client IDs that were created for George. We will see on the previous slide how missing data standards and formats contributed to the creation of George's 7 different client IDs. So go back, please, one slide. Yeah, thank you.
A screenshot is displayed listing the results of a search for the name George Jones, providing multiple clients.
Notice that in the search criteria fields, that's the box outlined in orange, the only data entered is his last name, first name, and U for both the sex and race fields. In Maryland's legacy system, the use of U, which is unknown, returns all possible values for sex and race. The search results, which are outlined in purple, are returned based on the search criteria entered. Because we only use the last name, first name, and U, the computer system returned 10 rows for a client who has 7 potential matches where each has a different client IDs. That's the rows with a Y in the SEL field to the George that we're looking for. However, if you look carefully, you'll notice that some of the matches have demographic data that is slightly different than the information we were given. After careful inspection, you will see the following demographic discrepancies have been entered for George over the past 9 years. And if you think about it, 7 IDs with 20 instances of child welfare involvement in 9 years, it's definitely not something we're proud of. So if you look, you'll see that George is spelled at least 3 different ways in rows 1, 2, and 3. 6 of the IDs for George display his last name as Jones. However, row 7 displays it as Jones-Smith. George has 2 different middle initials, middle initial D in rows 5 and 8, and middle initial A in rows 7 and 10. And by the way, that middle initial D is actually the middle name of duplicate. There are 3 different dates of birth for George in rows 1, 2, and 8. He has 3 different sex codes in rows 1, 2, and 3. And he has 4 different race codes in rows 1, 2, 3, and 8. Finally, 2 of the 7 IDs display a social security number in rows 2 and 10. However, the last 4 digits have the 9 and the 0 transposed. Okay, so since we can't make assumption about a client's identity, the next big question is, are they all the same George? This is the time-consuming and costly piece of first figuring out if, in fact, they all are the same George by finding something in common among each of the IDs. Definitely not an easy task, and definitely not quick. Next slide, and then next slide, please.
A graphic of a heart is shown with CRS at the center, surrounded by 6 different types of information systems that feed or share data with CIS.
Okay, and so this is just a brief a chart that explains how our current system looks. CRS is the component of our legacy system where all 6.2 million records live. And what you see around it are the other program area applications that are either directly connected to that heartbeat or exchange data through interfaces. Excuse me one second. Our challenge is that MD Chessie, which is our SACWIS system in green, has its own unique client identifier, as does the Child Care Automated Tracking System, the Maryland Health Benefits Exchange, and the challenge is to match up the unique client identifier from these external applications to the exact same person in the heartbeat. While not as hard for the Cares and Adult Services people, because they work directly within the heart, they still are challenged with trying to make sure that they're matching to the right client. Okay, so next slide, please. So, why one client, 7 IDs? Child welfare staff are not usually given accurate client demographics for a client at the point of registration, and as such, they are more likely to create duplicates more often than other agencies who require verification. Moreover, staff do not understand the importance of establishing a client's history on a single client ID, or the impact of updating demographics for other programs linked to the child welfare client database who may not even be aware that their data has been changed. So an example of this is where, say, a child welfare worker changes a duplicate client's name to be last name error, first name created, and middle name in, without realizing that when a child support worker who shared the same client attempted to send out a system-generated notice of failure to pay, the notice printed out as, "Dear Mr. Created an Error." Again, not something you would like to happen. Next slide, please. So how did this happen? This problem often stems from child welfare staff's lack of understanding about the various types of search and DHR's failure to train staff on how to use search. Unfortunately, a lot of agencies don't put enough emphasis on the importance of search. Staff may not take the time to conduct a thorough search for a client. Instead, simply create a new. It's easier. What's the difference? And the agency has not provided and monitored a standard operating procedure for all staff responsible for searching and registering clients. So once again, I'm going to let John take a moment to explain how Maryland's IT modernization effort will address the issue of duplicates.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So the technology is just one part of the answer. We will have a identity deconfliction system that will provide immediate alerts if a duplicate client is created. But the ingestion process, the process that the caseworkers will follow, is at least as important as the technology that they're utilizing. Maryland needs to have a standardized ingestion process that will ensure that data is ingested in a consistent manner. So we're going to need to have well, first we're going to need to conduct process mapping. We're going to need to do some value chain mapping and process mapping in order to find the ingestion best practices, both in terms of efficiency and in making sure that the most clean data gets into the system. Once we have those processes identified, then we will roll out training to make sure that across the state, to make sure that all local departments are following the same process, make sure that data is getting into the system in the same manner. And So next slide, I'll turn it back over to Lori.
And here I am again. And just for your information, we only have 2 more stories to go. This is story number 4, is about hijacked client identities. So you might ask, how did Paul, age 20, who was a young adult in foster care, all of a sudden become Philip, age 22, who was a young adult applying for food stamps? Next slide, please. The long story of how Paul became Philip is just one example of the many risks associated with multi-agency client sharing. Paul, who that is his real name, was a client in CIS as far back as 1993, had involvement with child support, family investment, and then was successfully converted to the new SACWA system in 2007. In 2012, when a food stamp application was received for a different client named Philip, the application was inadvertently connected to Paul. Next screen, please. Exactly what happened? Again, Paul, a 20-year-old young adult in foster care, was turned into an unrelated 22-year-old named Philip who was applying for food stamps. All of the demographic data of the 22-year-old overwrote the demographic data of the 20-year-old in the child welfare application. As such, he could no longer be found by searching for him by his original name. This action caused several impacts, including the inability to make foster care payments due to the client suddenly turning 22, because the foster care worker could no longer validate the placements in the child welfare application. She had no choice but to pay the provider outside of the child welfare application, which results then in the state's inability to track payments. And more worse than that is that, Philip now appears to have been a child in foster care, and Paul appears to have received food stamps, neither of which is true. And so hijacked identities are a problem. Next slide, please. Why? Why did this happen? Because the Family Investment Administration worker who penned the food stamp case incorrectly associated the 22-year-old man who was applying for food stamps to an unrelated existing 20-year-old foster care youth. How did it happen? Again, insufficient training on how to set up a food stamp case, unreasonable time frames for pending and completing food stamp applications, limited understanding of advanced technical system functionality, and failure to understand potential consequences to other programs sharing the same client ID. Next slide, please. This is a slide I dug out of the archives, but it demonstrates 2 examples of how hijacking occurs through the interface. So child welfare staff must manually connect the MD Chessie client ID, and in this instance we are referring to Paul, to the correct client and not Philip in this example, in CIS through the registration interface. If the MD Chessie client ID is mistakenly connected to the wrong CIS client ID, as was the case in this instance, then all demographic data of the wrong CIS client overwrites the Chessie client demographic data. Similarly, CIS staff must manually associate clients applying for benefits to an existing CIS ID, if they're already known, within the CIS system, rather than through an interface. However, if the CIS client ID that CIS staff associate to is also known to Chessie and is not the correct client, then all demographic data of the wrong CIS client overwrites the MD Chessie client demographic data through the interface. This is just 2 examples how hijacking occurs. Okay, next slide. We're moving on to story number 5, so this will be the last. Interface challenges.
A diagram is shown demonstrating how 3 systems are connected and share information. The 3 systems are CIS, MD, Chessie, and HBX, Health Benefits Exchange.
This is a story about a client for whom 3 demographic changes were documented in the legacy system. However, that does not mean that the demographic updates were initiated by CIS. In fact, The demographic updates could have been made by either of the three systems shown. The legacy system is CIS, which is shown as the first silo under the Department of Human Resources. The SACWA system is MD Chessie, as shown as the second silo under the Department of Human Resources. The HBX system is shown as a separate silo under the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. The green and red arrows represent the interfaces that were built to allow shared data and record linkage. Should either of these interfaces fail, data integrity and data quality are significantly impacted, as you will see in the following slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we see here, what happened, we really are not sure at this point because it's recently discovered issue that is currently being analyzed, but as you can see in the little chart, we actually have the same person in CIS, the legacy system, as is in the MD Chessie system. However, when you look in the CIS system, that person's name is John A. Brooks, Jr. That same client associated to the Chessie ID 10002 shows up in the Chessie system as Alexander Brooks John. The demographic changes did not update the record in Chessie, and again, we are currently analyzing this interface failure. So John will now speak about how Maryland's IT modernization will help us address this problem when hijacked identities, as in story number 4, and the interface challenges that we face based on today's outdated technology. John?
Thank you. Next slide, please. So the modernization effort, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to create a common data repository. We're going to have a NoSQL data repository that all 12 of the departments that have signed on to the modernization effort will share. So that will at least alleviate a lot of the issues with a client having, a client being entered differently into two different operational databases that two different departments are using. And we thought, some of the departments may not be able to or be willing to use that common data repository. So there's some other technologies that we've looked at, some streaming analytics type of technologies that will use API calls to bring the data together and in real time do some sort of analysis on it that will identify when different departments, different databases that the different departments are using actually do have the same record entered multiple times. Next slide. So, kind of as I mentioned earlier also, the data quality is where the root of all this starts. We can put all the bells and whistles on top of our data, our MDM features. We can have the RESTful APIs, the streaming analytics. We can have the improved search capabilities. But without the better data at the core, those really aren't going to serve a whole lot of a purpose. So first we need to identify data quality metrics that directly relate back to the needs of our workers. Then we need to design and implement processes for measuring those metrics. And then we can use those performance metrics to continuously improve our data quality. Next slide. So we have some approaches to improving the data quality that we're looking at now. Some of them are following some of our federal partners, or some best practices of our federal partners, such as FEA and our MITA. Those on the call associated with ACS/CMS should probably be pretty familiar with the MITA standards, I would guess. We're looking to introduce data quality tools such as the Informatica Data Quality Suite, and to consolidate data stores to the common data repository. And there's kind of the listed below, or the reasons I've been hitting on throughout the presentation of the benefits of the common data repository.
The bullet points referenced are: reduce the redundancies, minimize the opportunities of compromising the data quality, facilitate the data quality improvement processes, and enforce data standards.
Next slide. So data quality will be significantly improved by secured low latency data, fresh data, basically not batch data, data that we can ingest in real time as it's being entered in the other systems. We've heard use cases where a person will go and get signed up for multiple services for multiple departments within the same day. So even if we are having these tools in place, if that happens on a batch process type of system, it wouldn't be able to catch it because there would be no joining of the records until that batch process occurs. Developing and using sophisticated, enhanced pre-built querying algorithms. So that's going back to our enhanced search capabilities. And then provide advanced analytics for power users that will enable some of the more advanced features like David was talking about with some of our predictive analytics, ad hoc searches, and we're proposing to do all this on a couple different NoSQL databases because that will allow for high scalability as we're trying to ingest records from 12 different departments. That'll be pretty important. So I think I'm going to turn it back over to David now to kind of wrap us up.
Sure. Next slide, please.
A chart is displayed comparing 4 aspects of Maryland's current situation and the corresponding future vision. The 4 situations and their respective future visions are current, no common data repository, and future, shared NoSQL data repository, current, poor search functionality, and future, upgraded search functionality, current, duplicate records, and future, gold record through identified deconfliction/MDM system and consistent ingestion process, current, no connectivity with other agencies, and future, RESTful APIs connecting to other agencies.
All right, so look, folks, we've covered a lot of ground and revealed a lot of dirty laundry, I suppose, but it's all very instructive. Certainly, these are issues that we've been looking at over some time, and we're very excited about moving forward. And as John has mentioned to us throughout the presentation here, some of the real next steps will involve real-time computing that'll be tools for us to use, but humans and folks on the ground need to be trained really well and be responsive to a lot of data conflicts that the computer can't or won't be allowed to address, and having very strong procedures in place with ongoing testing and ongoing review and update with folks so that we can keep up with the challenge, the beast of keeping clients straight as we go along. And so we do hope to solve these chronic challenges that are facing us, getting client identification and interagency interfaces right as we move forward. And these are tools that we look forward to implementing and new processes that we look forward to implementing. And so I guess the basic question is Maryland ready for safety? And we feel like, yes, we definitely hope to be much more ready for safety and security for our clients as we step into the next phases of modernization here. And the time is right for these changes and these solutions. They're urgently needed. Maryland not only pays an awful lot for the current legacy-driven system from month to month, just the maintenance costs alone to keep that thing chugging along, but no one's really added up the cost of not doing it right all these years. I was looking around. There are some statistics out there that say that poor data quality costs American organizations and businesses hundreds of billions of dollars annually. And of course, the real human cost, as Laurie pointed out with the first 2 stories today. So we hope to focus our attention on getting data right so that we can do a better job of serving our clients. We want to retain our frontline staff, have them best focused on the work at hand, and not pulling their hair out about data, and be better positioned as we move forward to use big data tools to help us do even more, seeing what works, what doesn't work, to see where and with which client groups we need to focus resources and just get better at serving. Some of you may know, not all, Maryland has a 4E waiver that we've just gotten underway with, and we're certainly very interested in shifting more and more away from the deeper end placement services that we have to supporting families up front. And all of this computer improvement will help us a great deal with that. So we're excited about the next steps, and I'd like to now turn it back over to Joyce, who will lead us into some questions, comments that you may have, and we all are learning as we go with this, trying to get it right. So we appreciate any and all feedback and questions, and thank you very much for taking the time today on this important topic. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Joyce.
Thank you. So I want to extend a huge thank you to David and Lori and John. And may we please open the phone lines for the chat to our webinar attendees for the Q&A session with our presenters. And Elizabeth, I believe you're going to manage this segment.
Actually, I'm going to turn it over to Amy. And Amy, can you let people know how they can line up on the phone to ask questions?
Yes, thank you. If you'd like to ask a question, please press *1. Please unmute your phone and record your name when prompted. It is required to introduce your question. Once again, that's *1 if you have a question.
Elizabeth speaks.
And while we're waiting, we do have a few that have come in via the live chat. So I'm going to start with, are there any specific challenges that you feel are attributed to you being a state-supervised, locally administered state?
David responds.
Being a state-administered, right, locally supervised. I think that in some ways, as we are grappling with the problems of client identification and search, having some centralized kind of controls and processes in place that we have everyone agreed to use from one jurisdiction to another. We've got the remote, small, rural jurisdictions out on the fringes of the state, Garrett County and Worcester on the one hand. We've got Baltimore City and some of the larger jurisdictions in the middle on the other hand. But I would think that this would help us to bring some consistency over time. Laurie or John, any other thoughts in relation to that?
I mean, kind of what we talked about earlier in terms of the process mapping and rolling out training to make sure that all data is entered consistently from a data cleanliness standpoint. I think that's going to be a big piece of the puzzle, potentially as big as the technology side.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Elizabeth speaks.
Amy, do we have anyone on the phone?
No questions on the phone.
Okay. Next question online. How much negotiation was necessary to get so many agencies to agree? And second part was, what was the role of executive leadership in making this happen?
John speaks.
So it depends on the agency. It's kind of the real answer. Some of the agencies were very excited to jump on. Some have already provided some transfer of funds over to us. Before we even had funding for DHR for this effort, we had a couple departments who were willing to chip in $2 or $3 million to kind of get the ball rolling. They believed in it so much. So the answer is it just really depends. Others were a bit of a struggle to bring on board. Some of the other ones there's still some data concerns with, and that's why I brought up some of the streaming analytics piece, where we may have to do some of the analysis kind of on the fly rather than having everything in a central repository. So it's kind of all over the board there, but the ones that have been very committed with us, there's definitely been a very visible commitment from the upper leadership, both within DHR and those departments, to bring us together to create this type of system. those leaders who have seen that the vision really will help the people across the state of Maryland by having the cleaner data, the more efficient processes, and not just the data. One of the other concerns, or not concerns, I guess, one of the other factors is we're showing some pretty good ROI numbers on this. We're looking to move everything into Amazon Web Services, moving everything into the cloud, which means we'll essentially be able to shut down all of our data centers. So just really with that move alone, we'll be saving over $10 million a year.
Elizabeth, this is Joyce.
Yes.
And I think I might have a little follow-on question to that notion. Are you, and this is probably for John, are you implementing a single data exchange standard? Like XML or NEAM or something like that?
So we're going to have, no. I guess that's the short answer. So basically there's going to be each of the applications will likely have to have its own its own database. We're going to be using some COTS applications. For instance, our replacement for Chessie for the child welfare system will be using most likely a COTS database. A COTS system that will then be configured for the needs of Maryland. It's going to take too much work to build out some of these, especially when there's people who have already done this pretty well for other states. We're not looking to have a big bang type of approach where we'll bring in one vendor or one system platform to create everything, but in the specific program areas where it makes sense, we'll be bringing in some COTS vendors. Those COTS vendors will likely have their own data standards, and they're not going to be able to change their system probably, or it would cost us a lot of money to change their system to interact with our back-end databases. So we're going to have to be flexible. We're going to have the right tools, the right processes, and the right types of database to make sure that we can ingest from anywhere, from anyone, essentially.
Thank you.
Amy, do we have any callers on the phone?
Not at this time.
Okay. So the next question we have online, although you'll use some algorithms, do you expect some level of manual intervention or human review?
Absolutely. So, yeah.
John speaks.
Right now, what we're seeing is sort of the best practice within this space is if you can meet a certain level of assurance that they are the same record, then it's generally okay to let the system go ahead and perform the join on its own. One of our other systems within Maryland that's doing it, I think they have to get to, I forget what it is, 99.
Very high.
Yeah, it's a pretty high number though. And if it goes beyond that threshold, it's basically telling you, I'm certain that these are the same two people. You don't need to perform any other analysis on it. And then if it comes in somewhere between like the 80 and 99% threshold, you have somebody take a look at it, but you generally kind of know that it's the same. If it comes in lower than that, it's there's other processes that can kick in, and you can kind of choose whether or not you still want to evaluate it via manual process, understanding that you may be spinning your wheels a little bit because not as many of those will be able to be identified as duplicates. And then if it comes in as a very low threshold, and I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, it basically decides that they're not the same person. There's no need to look at these as a potential duplicate. So there's a range there in the middle where it'll kick it out for a person to look at. But anything above that range or below that range, the system will make the determination on its own.
Okay. And the last question that I have online, what federal funds, if any, are you using for this effort?
John speaks.
So I'm hoping this comes from one of the ACF people. So we've submitted we've submitted our APDs. They've gone out to the three major CMS partners. We've submitted both 50-50 and 90-10. I believe we're just looking at the 90-10 though now. The 50-50 it was in for initial review, but it's been withdrawn. So we're just looking for the 90-10 funding now. It's in with CMS now, ACF, and then the FNS, yes. So yes, we are looking at funding, at federal funding. We're anticipating a mix of federal funds somewhere in the 70 to 80% range. And from what we've heard from some of our other state and contracting partners, they think that may be a little bit conservative, but we'd rather be conservative than too aggressive and come up short of money.
Okay. Amy, do we have any other questions on the line?
There are no questions on the phone.
Okay, Joyce, I think at this time then I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, you want to advance a couple slides to the conclusion?
Sure.
Okay, so again, thank you to David and Lori and John, and we hope the information shared with you today was both informative and valuable. As a reminder, please remember to register for the May webinar once the announcement is released. And additionally, if you have any questions regarding today's topic, would like more information about any of our scheduled webinars, or would like to volunteer your state as a topic presenter, please do not hesitate to contact me at the email listed above.
Joyce can be reached via email at joyce@kassets.com. Recorded versions of the webinars are available at https://www.acf.hhs.gov/cb/research-data-hyphen-technology/state-hyphen-tribal-systems/training.
Again, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available online. When it is complete and posted, we will send a message via the SACWIS Manager's listserv with the link. Again, thank you all for attending.